Welcome everyone to the WinAdmins March 2022 user group meeting. Today we're joined by Adam Cook for the second time, who's made a bit of a name for himself in PowerShell, even though he doesn't want to admit it. And he's going to talk to us about Pester today. We are for those who don't know, the WinAdmins team. We got some links on the left. You can join us on Discord, Twitter, our relatively new LinkedIn group. We're trying to hit up a few other social spots as well in the next few months. Our presenter for April isn't ready for us to present his title or description yet, so keep an eye on our webpage, our Twitter, our Discord for what's coming up in April, but we're going to have some fun stuff then. And then our normal housekeeping things for folks who haven't been before. Meeting's recorded, so if you don't want your voice recorded or anything like that, feel free to throw questions into the chat, and either Adam, Anthony, or Christina will read them out for you. You can be interactive, so everybody's muted by default, but if you have questions along the way, Adam, I can tell you, does not mind at all being interrupted, so throw your hand raised out there, and one of the four of us will pause it at some point and let you get your question in. Again, also throw them in chat. Historically, people do a lot of the side conversations in there, and Adam will usually respond to them after. And if you want to present in the future, I don't think we have anybody from May yet, so May and beyond, feel free to reach out if you have something interesting to talk about, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, I will stop presenting and turn it over to you. All yours, Adam.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, okay, cool. Let me share out PowerPoint. Cool. Yeah, absolutely. Questions, by all means, as and when they go up. I love the interactiveness. So if there's anything that comes to mind, anything anybody sees that they want to kind of talk more about, clarify, perhaps I haven't explained something clearly, definitely that's the best way. Don't be afraid to come off mute and ask. So yeah, going to do a session today on breaking the ice with Pester for people who tinker with PowerShell. But before I go into the kind of things, well, can you see my screen okay? I haven't even confirmed that. Is that coming through all right?
It looks amazing, nice and clear, and you sound great too.
Cool. Okay, yeah, so first thing about me, if you don't know me, Adam Cook. I live in the UK. I live in Southampton. I'm a support engineer at Patch My PC, and some of the tech I'm interested in and enjoy working with is PowerShell, ConfigMan, Azure, and WSUS. Unfortunately, is a big dumpster fire because I work for Patch My PC, and WSUS is a large part of our integration. So, yeah. Know a bit about WSUS. I blog a little bit on Sysman Squad, so you've probably seen or heard Sysman Squad in WinAdmins a bit. It's something I think Adam Gross and Nathan Zenert kind of head up together, and there's a lot of content there. It's great, and I haven't written anything in a while. I do plan to, but yeah, I write some content there and on my website too. I run a user group as well for PowerShell, PowerShell Southampton. If you go to pssouth.co.uk, you can check out previous session videos and see future ones too. It's all virtual at the moment, given the pandemic, but hopefully we're going to come out the other end of this at some point, and we can get back to going in person, which would be great. But the sessions, so about an hour. I honestly loosely timed it, so I think it's about an hour. We'll see. I'll do my best to be respectful of all your time, and you can get all of the content from that link, which is also the QR code. So if you want to see the slide deck, the code materials, go there, and that'll take you to the GitHub repo. But yeah, in this session, I'm going to break the ice with Pester. So there's a lot to Pester, right? And it can be useful in so many different ways. And I just want to kind of sell it to you. I think why you should be using it, some of the key points to really ask yourself, okay, why? There's a lot of energy about it in the community when you talk about kind of writing code and testing it. But I really want to hit home on some of the why. I want to touch base on how it fits into a pipeline. So my previous talk a couple of years ago was on the whole idea of what is a pipeline, and I want to show where and how your testing with Pester can fit into your pipeline. I'll do a little recap on what a pipeline is if you didn't attend that, but if you haven't and you want to learn a little bit more about GitHub Actions, definitely check that out. And all you need is some experience with PowerShell, some Git knowledge is ideal, not essential, and zero knowledge of Pester. So A few things I found interesting when I was learning Pester. Like I learned it like a couple of months ago, just before Christmas, and then we went down the rabbit hole of Advent of code, and I forgot about it for 4 weeks, and then picked it up again in January. And these are just the 3 things that I found about its history that are interesting. So it was made by someone called Scott Muck in 2011, and I think he committed the first. He did the first commit like on New Year's Day or the day after, so he was hungover, which is kind of cool. And then today, however, it is primarily maintained by Jakub Jaresh, who was going to be on the call today, but he's not. That's okay. He did actually do an introduction to Pester for my user group. That was an excellent dive. I'm going to do something a little bit different, where I'm going to go a little bit lighter. I'm going to just put the toes in just a bit to the water, if you like, and talk about pipeline integration, whereas Jakub went into a bit more detail. So if you're feeling a little bit more hungry after this, definitely go check that out, and I'll also issue some resources at the end for further reading. But yeah, it came shipped to Windows in 2015, and that was the first open source bit of code that Microsoft shipped with Windows. I found that interesting. Pester was baked into Windows on release in 2015, which actually caused issues in more mature versions of earlier builds of Windows 10, because when the ownership changed, the code signing certificate changed on the project, and when you may have experienced this, you won't experience it anymore in newer builds of Windows, but if you tried to update Pester, you would have seen like an error along the lines of, don't trust it or whatever. But just some few points that I found interesting. But why? I just want to go into the why, right? So there's a lot of energy about, it's great. There was this question asked I put on Twitter, a Twitter poll, like, do you use it? And then, a lot of people said, no, I have no idea what it is. And then there was kind of like some remarks made back. It's like, why not? You should be, but why? Being told to do something because you should and not necessarily being explained the why is a big disconnect. So just want to say that Pester is a fantastic tool, and it will leap you and your code forward, right? And some of the things that I think are key are these 5 points. So survival, right? If you intend to have code that you intend for it to exist for a long time, where it perhaps integrates with or perhaps runs on or depends on another service, you want to make sure that it survives. So what I mean is, say if you have code that works with AD or Graph or something that could change, and you want the code to last a long time, that's a solid reason to invest time in learning to write tests and actually writing them too. Another point is if you're sharing your code and you want contributions. So if you intend to make your code open source, by having tests, it makes it so much easier for people to contribute so that they don't have to worry about, am I going to break something fundamental with my new feature or fix? By offering those people the tests and you, gives you that peace of mind of just ease of contribution, just to be able to focus, which is kind of like the next point. So if you don't know what JFDI is, Google it. I'm not going to say it, but that and focus. So having tests just gives you this kind of ability to just have immense focus on just fixing bugs, writing features, making those improvements you've always been wanting to do, just get those things done. And then you don't have to worry so much about constantly needing to remember or remind yourself when you revisit the project weeks or months later how all the smaller pieces of your code works. If you just initially write tests with a fundamental logic, which I'll show you how, you can kind of just rely, just kind of lean on that, just kind of depend on those tests that you have, and just have faith that anything new you add on top, the fundamental knowledge doesn't change. And don't get me wrong, testing is always like an iterative process. You always have to improve, especially if you add new features, right? But yeah, it gives you a nice sense of focus. And then no more reoccurring bugs. So that's kind of obvious to some degree. If you experience a bug, you find the root cause. It's good practice to write a test to make sure that bug does not reoccur. Otherwise, that could be quite embarrassing. And then lastly, test infrastructure as services. So everything I've just said is all about testing your code that you've written. Don't have to do that. You can still use Pester to test infrastructure as services. So if you wanted to test the health of domain controllers, Exchange servers, config-man, if you wanted to test the health or kind of like the state or the interaction that you might have with kind of API services, you can still use Tester to do that. And I'll touch on a pretty trivial example later on what that might look like. Cool. Just looking at my notes and I just saw something that doesn't make sense, so I'm just going to skip that. Cool. So the bits that you only need to know right now are free functions. And they're a little bit weird in their syntax. So you have free functions, describe, it, and should. Describe takes two parameters. One is a string, the other is a script block. And the same is true for it. Should has lots of parameters. Here's an example on its usage. The order on how I've listed these functions is important. Should belongs within it, and it belongs within describe. So you can see how I've got here. And let me explain what just the intent of describe. So we'll start with describe. A script file which contains Pester tests must have at least one describe block. And the intent of that is to organize your tests within a subject, within a target. So for instance, I have a subject here, get-WinAdmins members, which is a fictitious function. It doesn't exist, which I'll demo in a bit. But the idea here is that I am going to define tests within my describe block, with the focus of my target being the function get-WinAdmins members. And the it block, you can consider this to be the action that you're going to take to test code, meaning that because it takes a script block within there, I'm going to call the command that I want to test. So it's the action, if you will, it's the behavior that you want to test, it's the code that you want to test. So again, that has the name, a name of a summary of what the test will be. So we can see here the name should not be null or empty. So we call the command, of which is the subject of the test, and we pipe it, and we use should. And should, the popular word that you'll hear a lot is assertion. You will be asserting that the output from get-WinAdmins members is not be null or empty. And should has a bunch of parameters, and I'll show you those. But this is the basic structure. In all tests, you'll have effectively one describe block or more, but within a describe block, you can have an infinite number of it blocks. So you describe the test, you do the test within the it, and then you make an assertion with should. Should accepts input from pipeline. So hence why it's kind of, you make the call and you pipe it to measure its output, measure its value, and is it of expected value. So cool. Yeah, I think that's everything in my notes I wanted to talk about there. Cool. So that brings me on to the demo. So here we go. Let me stop sharing and go to the VM. And I have to close that because I don't need that open anymore. Does that come through okay, Chris?
Yep, and nice and big too. So it seems easily readable. But if anybody on the meeting has any problem seeing it, you can actually zoom in, holding in Control and scrolling with your mouse. There's probably some other hotkeys too. And if anybody says anything in chat about the size or anything, I'll call that out.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. Okay. So you'll see here that I have VS Code. I actually have the repository open, which if you scan the QR code, or if you went to that link I mentioned earlier where it takes you to the repo, this is it. I have it open in VS Code. And on the left-hand side, you'll see that we have a bunch of script files. You can actually see the PowerPoint too. And the one I'm going to focus on initially is these two, actually. So you'll see that I have the fake command within this script file. If I just open this up, it's just a a function that's kind of silly but trivial. We're just going to loop between 1 and 5, and we're going to create an array of objects where we kind of simulate like a bit like a Discord username but fake, right? And so it's a very basic example, but the idea here is that generally you have Pester tests within accompanying file names with the naming convention of .tests.ps1. Generally, Pester likes to look for test files, script files which contain tests, where the naming convention ends in tests.ps1. So if I open this up, I'm just going to get them both open and zoom in here. What I've got going on in here is this I haven't explained yet. Before all. Within a before all block, you should generally import the code that you want to test. So I actually had a function definition within my script file, and I need to dot source that to get that available within my session. But it's very important that you put this type of thing within the before all block. Pester has some very particular internal processing on how it goes about discovering and managing scopes of your code. I'm not going into too much detail about what that is or how exactly it works, largely because I don't fully understand it. I just know it's a thing. But I just want to go nice and light, just enough to kind of get you nice and comfortable and competent with it. So yeah, other things you could put in here is like import module. So if you wanted to test a particular command within a module, you could replace this with the commandlet import module. But here I'm just dot sourcing my script file, which contains the function get-winadmin members, which you can see the output here. But other than that, you can see more or less the example which I had available to me in the slide deck, but it's a little bit different. So I've still got the describe block here, where I'm targeting the test to the appropriate name. It's off the function, and I'm going to create an assertion, creating a test where the output should return 5 members, which is true. So if I just click run test here, oh, I didn't update it. See, this is, I set up the VM just before the call, assuming it'll be fine. I wonder if I can quickly update it now. Install module Pester. Of course. I don't want to do it on my desktop. Let me quickly do that, 2 seconds. What have I got now? Cool. Okay, so that should do it. Let me bin that and start a new session. So I actually had the old one installed, 3.4.0, but I'm going to work with 5.3.1. And I'm just going to hit test just to make sure that that runs. Yay, cool. Okay, easy one. Yeah, so me having this kind of control available to me here within VS Code to click this nice button, run test, is the Pester extension. So just grab the extension and it would kind of intelligently know, hey, this is a Pester test file, and it would kind of offer these nice buttons where you can dynamically invoke these tests. But the output here is pretty nice. It's pretty clean. So I can see that it was a success. So I can see a bit of startup information here. I can see the name of the description, the described block, and the name of the test itself, and it was a success because it's a green output, and it gives me a lot of other information about how long it took. And if I was to kind of force a failure here, because again the assertion was that it has a count of 5, so the command get WinAdmin members does provide an array of PS objects. It provides 5 of them, so that was pretty easy. You could do this differently, right? There's a couple of different ways you could do this. So for instance, I could wrap that and just access the count property, and then instead I could use the B parameter of should to be 5, and I would run test, and that would pass 2. So if I was to give you a quick sort of insight into the parameters available for should, you can do all kinds of things here. You can say it must be something, must not be something, it must be exactly something. So be exactly means that it must be of a strict type comparison. So by saying something is 5 means it's quite loose whether an integer of 5 or a string of 5 was given. You can do greater than or less than, be in if you're dealing with like a collection of strings or something. All kinds of parameters. There's 20 of them to do all kinds of comparison operators. It's pretty cool. But I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm going to put that back to B5. And if I were to force a failure here, it's pretty nice in the output too. So I'm going to click run test. And it's nice and clear. You get that sea of red. And it's pretty verbose a little bit. So you can see that should return 5 members is the name of the test. Expected 6, but got 5. So we were expecting a count of 6, so we're expecting the integer 6 to be passed up to should, but we got 5 instead. Cool. So yeah, that's pretty easy. So the next one's a little bit more fun. I think the next one is infrastructure tests. Yeah, it is. So this is with the viewpoint of not necessarily testing code that I've written now. This is kind of going down that kind of idea of being able to test services or kind of infrastructure. But there's like a super simple and super basic example here of I'm going to make the subject of my test internet connectivity, which is ironic because I lost it earlier and hopefully I don't lose it now. But we're going to create a test where I want to have an air quotes ideal response time. So what we're doing here is that we're doing a testnet connection. VS Code sometime in the future. Add-ons and sets. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tyler, I can totally do that. I'll do that afterwards. If not, tweet it. Yeah, for sure. I got a boatload of weird extensions I probably don't need anymore. But yeah, in this test, I can do test connection, right? And I'm just going to ping my router. This is a ping. This is PowerShell's ping. So I'm just going to ping my router. I'm going to ping it once, and I'm going to set a timeout threshold of 1 second. And you can see here that I'm immediately accessing the latency property. So if I ran just this bit of code, I'm just going to select that bit of code. I'm going to right click and choose run selection. And that gives me 1. So that meant that I have a 1 millisecond response time to my router. And I'm going to assert that it should be less than 50. So I'm going to run this test. Obviously, that's going to test fine because if I had a response time of 50 to my router, then there'll be trouble. But just as an example that you don't have to do tests against your code. You can using this kind of assertive kind of syntax where you pipe to should, you can just kind of ask for or anticipate or would like an ideal of any value. So if we would just do like I'm not going to create a real test, but something like, test critical services on a domain controller, for example. And then you would have, in fact, the subject actually would probably just be domain controllers, if you think about it. So we'll just put that domain controllers. And within the it block, then you would describe your test maybe to be critical services running on a DC. And then something like that could generally be, I don't know, get service. And I don't know what the critical services are for a DC. It's been a minute since I worked with AD. But say if it was an array, right? So say if you provide multiple service 2, I'm pretty sure get service accepts computer name or sim session at least. If not, you could probably wrap this around an invoke command and enter a computer name to a DC, right? You can say DC script block. And then you could assert the output that, so what would happen is that if you did a get service on a computer naming 2 services, you would make sure that all of those services were running. So then you would probably just select the process, the property, I guess, status, and then you would probably create an assertion of not contains or something like that. So not contain, I think there's, let me remind myself, let me do be like, be true, be in, contain. Here we go. Yeah, so not contain stopped. So I have to put the not operator there too. So this is completely sort of fictitious code. This is not real. I don't even know if it would run. So consider this to be like pseudocode, right? But the idea here is that you could use this to test infrastructure. You could assert a state and a desired value with the should and get something back. Were you going to say something, Chris? You came off mute.
I did. There's a question in the chat from Lewis who says that they've been using Pester tests like this to check for installed software, and was asking, when you do a Pester test like this, doesn't the output only show in the console? Is there any way to capture the failed tests without using invoke Pester?
That is a great question, and I'm so glad, because that is actually something. Do I show that in here? Let me have a quick look at my notes. I show it in the next one, so I could just jump straight to that now. Yes, there is a way. There is a way. So, and there's something also kind of quirky as well. But let me jump straight to that, because that's a great question. So the way you invoke tests with Pester is one way is what I've just been doing with clicking the run test button within VS Code. But ideally what you would probably do is use the invoke-pester command, which comes with the Pester module. And you can provide a path to a script file which contains your tests. So I have invoke-mytest.ps1, which is going to call Pester to call example-tests.ps1. And this test, very simply, is going to make sure that my OS version is this. So in fact, if I ran this manually now, I'm pretty sure that will pass. Yes, great. So using the invoke Pester, if I just ran this by selecting in run selection, what you'll see here is, or rather what you won't see in the output, is if I enforced a failure on this test. So if I just flip the logic here and use a not operator, this would force a failure. Let me clear up all this noise here and rerun that. Cool. So I forced a failure, and what you would not see here, this is the point I wanted to make, is this caught string in the output. You do not see it anywhere in my output. That's because Pester does not treat a failed test as a sort of terminating exception or a terminating error by default. And for me, this is a great question. I love it. For me, this was a quirk for me, because the way I was trying to use it, you might be inclined to maybe say, oh, okay, yeah, I'll just use error action stop, right? Because that forces errors to generally become terminating. But that unfortunately still doesn't do that, which for me at start was a little bit confusing. But when you kind of spend a bit of time with Pester, you appreciate there's actually no failure. Pester itself was still fine. It was just your test didn't run correctly. That was it. That's not necessarily a failure of code execution. That's a failure of the test, which, yeah, that's a bit grey. But anyway, the way you would force this, the way you would force an error so that you can examine test results. There is relevance here. I will draw the connection. I will get there. Is that there's a couple of ways. One of them is that you can create a Pester configuration object. So I'm just going to create a configuration or a config variable. I'm going to create new Pester configuration. If I just run this selection here, we clear this noise, and we take a look at the type of which is now config, you'll see that it's now a Pester configuration file. Sorry, type, object type, not file. And if we look at all the properties, we have various configuration options available. One of them is run. So I'm going to focus on run for a minute, because if I now look inside run, I can set all these properties. I can provide a path to Pester. I can say throw. So the definition of throw is throw an exception when a test run fails. This is what we want. And then to answer the question that was asked, if I go up one level and we take a look at test result, the configuration option for test result, by default, this is not enabled, but you can output the test result to an XML file, which of one of these types here, XUnit or NUnit XML, NUnit 2.5, or JUnit XML. So when your test runs, it outputs the results, success or failure, to this in an XML file, and then you can choose the output path. So let me just spend a quick minute configuring these. So you would just kind of define these like you would set properties on objects in PowerShell. So for path, I no longer need to provide this via a parameter because I can set this on the configuration object. So I'm just going to yeet that into here. I'm just going to define also the throw. Now the good thing about the throw, if I go back to there real quick, we can see that its default is false. So the default throw an exception when a test run fails. Its default is false and its value is currently false. So if I set this to true, what I'll do is I'll also configure test result as well. And now when you call invoke Pester, you don't need to specify the path anymore. You just pass it a configuration that we just defined. And I'm also going, I think I need to set one more on the config object, because by default, the verbosity that Pester gives you in its output in console is a bit minimal. And I think you can set it to be output. I think you can set it to be verbose. I got butterfingers here. Yeah, verbosity. So we can configure the verbosity. If I take a look at verbosity, the default value for that is normal, but what I really want is detail. Detail is a nice halfway house of being pretty verbose but not too overwhelming. It provides you a breakdown of each of the result of each individual it block, whereas normal just kind of gives you an overall, did any fail, otherwise did they all pass, no individual sort of detail of all of the it blocks. So I'm going to set that to real quick. Config, what was it again? Output and verbosity. And I'll set it to detailed. And let me just run that real quick. And now what I'm expecting to see is that I'm expecting to my test within example.test.ps1 to still run, which is again just checking OS version. But what I'm expecting to see is for that test to still fail, and now I'm hoping to see this string caught dropped to the output stream in my console. So I'm just going to run selection on this now. And I can see exactly that. The test failed for the same reason. The should assertion did not evaluate as true. And the good thing now is caught is printed. So this is good, right? Because if you're thinking about, where's the test result gone? Did I not configure that right? I was expecting to see an XML file pop up in my Explorer test result. I set that wrong. Let me set that to. I'm going to rerun that real quick. Yeah, cool. So here's that test result.xml that appeared because of that that option there on line 8. So if I jump in there real quick, you'll be able to just pass out the result of that. So it's a little bit finicky to kind of read XML and deal with XML, but it's good to know that this is actually like a standard format. The 3 different types of options that you can set for the XML format, I think they are of standard type. There's a schema that comes with them too, which is quite nice. So yeah, if you wanted to kind of scrape through your test result, this is the way, which is important because if you were going to go down the route of testing your infrastructure, or testing software installs is a really good example, you would probably want to do in your code like a notification sort of fire, or maybe attempt at like remediating. So if you come back to my kind of infrastructure test where I started mapping out, checking if critical services are running on a DC or something, in my code I might want to kind of have some kind of logic where, well, if this test failed, try and connect to the DC and start them, which I'll be honest, if that's how you want to go about managing your infrastructure, like I feel for you, because you should probably look at investing in like a real RMM platform or tool, right? But budget constraints are a thing, and a lot of people do kind of code out their own kind of monitoring and management of stuff. But yeah, so that would totally be a way. And the ability to be able to kind of try catch a Pester test into is so that you can catch that and be able to kind of go about and analyze the output and then do the notification firing or the remediation actions if you needed. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. It was only a long answer because I actually really wanted to cover that point anyway. So I kind of just jumped ahead, but I hope it. So how would you get that output with without invoke-pester? I don't know is the honest answer. I don't think you can. I wish Jakob was on the call because he would for sure know the answer to that. The only way to tell Pester to throw an exception or produce this output would be to pass a configuration object or pass it the configuration parameter, which also accepts a hash table. And if you're not running your test by not calling invoke-pester, then yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. So how are you doing your testing then? Are you just calling the script files which contain your tests and that's it? You just invoke those script files directly on in whatever automation you have, is that? But yeah, no, that's yeah, okay, solid question. I'll take a minute just to go back a couple of steps back to the infrastructure test one, because there is a nice example there that I want to show. I'm just going to nuke this domain controllers example, because there's a nice sort of feature that I kind of want to jump into here on this it block. So take the scenario where you wanted to test 2 IP addresses. So I guess your instinct might be to, okay, well, I'll just copy paste, right? You might just want to copy paste and then you'll enter in your second desired IP address. That's, yeah, sure, that's one way. Then what would happen here is that you'll end up with, oh, what's going on there? Did I get rid of a bracket or something? That's one way, but then what you'll end up with is basically 2 assertions within the same test. So you'll see here that we have 2 should assertions because we're measuring 2 IP addresses within the same test. And both of these assertions would have to evaluate as true in order for that test to pass, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with this. But there is a nice feature baked into this it function, which is quite nice to handle kind of repetition and looping and arrays, and you can pass it an array. So I'm using the test cases parameter here on the it block, and I am going to pass it 2 strings as an array, which are my IP addresses. And this is just a nice way to be able to avoid repeating myself in code. And I can reference each iterable in the array, just like you would in any other loop, like the for each object thing. You can use the PS item to access that iterable. Now, if I run this test, I can see that they both succeed and they have their both individual tests. The only thing that is not clear here is which one is which one was against my router and which one was against Google DNS. I guess you could probably infer from the response time, but if you were looking at just the names, it's not clear. So what you can do, again, there's a nice little tidbit here. You can use this syntax within the name of the test, and this would print out the current iterable it is working on. So if I save that and hit run test, we can see now with this looping kind of construct that we have with the test cases parameter, we can see which one exactly it's currently working on. And that's just super basic. You go to the docs, okay, I highly recommend you do. Go to the docs for Pester and you'll see 4 test cases. There is a part in the docs dedicated to test cases, and they use a hash table. And you can get pretty dynamic and pretty efficient with this if you have kind of similar repetitive tests, but under different conditions with different data. So sounds vague, but you can definitely take test cases up a level. Does $_ work in the describe statement? I guess it wouldn't, since we haven't hit that part of the code yet. No, you're on the money there, Mike, with the latter. Yeah, so you don't include any code within describe. Do not include any executable code, not even write host, not even anything trivial like that. The intent within describe is purely just the it blocks. Now, as a caveat there, you can actually include other blocks too, like before or. You can have a before or within a describe block as well, and you can even have a before each. You can even have after or and after each. To me, I feel like the intent of these is a little bit self-explanatory, but you can kind of add other executable code within these blocks that run either before all the it blocks or before each of the it blocks, or after all of the it blocks, or after each of the it blocks. So yeah, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. I think that's probably pretty good detail though, but otherwise I'm going to keep things light. The docs and the resources I'll point to later do a solid job on that. I was talking more about between the quotes on line 4, which you beat me to it. Oh, I see. Oh, okay. Were you asking? Okay. You were asking how to include, which is now line 2. I think I understand. So you just wanted to be able to use PS item here, but the syntax is actually this, I think. Might be a bit of a delay between you and me, but okay. Yeah, no. Yeah, cool. Okay, cool. Sweet. Cool. What's next? Yeah, cool. Okay, so let me stop sharing and go back to the slide deck, because now I want to talk about pipeline. By the way, Chris, when I do this, I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, because I did a test with Scott the other day. Do you see the pointer? Does that come through on Teams?
It does come through.
That's awesome. Okay, cool. So CI/CD pipeline, if you were in the GitHub Actions talk I did a couple of years ago, this slide will look familiar. If not, let me just spend a quick minute walking you through what you see. So the whole idea of CI/CD means continuous integration or continuous deployment. And it's kind of like the practice of automating the testing and deployment of your code. So the intent is that on step 1, you would make a change to your code and check it into source control. And the act of checking it into a source control invokes a pipeline, which is this larger blue block, which contains 2 sub-processes, CI and CD. CI is the continuous integration of the acronym, and within there, you generally build your code and you test it. So with PowerShell, it's a funny one. There's not really much in the way of building. There's no compiled as such. Like, you can create compiled commandlets, and it's more relevant when you do modules building. But in any case, the main point I want to make here is, as well as build, there is also testing. Testing is a fundamental part of an automated delivery system for your code once you've checked it in. You could have this idea that before you move on to deploying your code to production, which could be simply publishing it to PowerShell Gallery, moving it to a production system or something like that, you could invoke tests in the ways that I've just shown you, and you can let that be the deciding factor whether you go ahead and deploy your code or not. If all of your tests pass fine, great, go to production. If you wanted that kind of human intervention of, I must approve this, I don't feel confident with that, I want a human interaction to approve before I deploy, that's cool. Then you're just doing continuous delivery, not continuous deployment. That's the difference between continuous deployment and continuous delivery. But this whole process, as soon as you throw testing into the mix, this just makes the whole release process of writing code and getting out the door just love. It's great. It just makes it so much easier. It just frees you of just such logistical burden. All you want to focus on at the end of the day is improving your code, fixing its issues, and making new features. As soon as you eliminate the need for repetitive testing and repetitive kind of logistics of moving it to production, then you can just focus on what really matters, which is improving the code. So one last demo, and this is again still about pipeline. I want to show you an example on how you could use Pester with GitHub Actions. So if we're looking back at pipelines, GitHub Actions is a platform you can use. So because it's on GitHub, a lot of people check their code into GitHub, and then you can invoke a GitHub action workflow to orchestrate your pipeline. So I'm going to show you how you can use Pester in a pipeline. And now I have to navigate Teams to share the right screen. Get the window back up. Cool. If you don't know GitHub Actions, that's equally okay. I'm going to give you a quick crash course. Another platform you could probably use is like Azure DevOps, but I don't know anything about that. I've only spent like not enough time in it compared to GitHub Actions, so I'm just going to focus on that. But GitHub Actions, effectively what you need in order to have a GitHub action workflow is have within your repository, like I do here, have a directory called .github, a subdirectory called workflows, and YAML files. Any active YAML file or valid YAML file within this directory will be considered a workflow file, which GitHub will try and take instruction from. And within this YAML file, let me get rid of this noise because I don't think I need that anymore. Oh, go away. I name my workflow, and I define the conditions of when my workflow is allowed to run, when my pipeline orchestration is allowed to run. So I can see that I have a bunch of stuff that's commented out. So otherwise you could define conditions on any push on these branches where files were modified in this path. That's a pretty common kind of condition to deem when you want your pipeline to run. You got an inference there that your code has changed in the source directory. It's on the master branch or the main branch, and you're ready to go. Or you can do it on a schedule or schedule, however you guys want to pronounce it. Why is this giving me grief? Go away. What happens if I hit allow? Does that give me an option to? No. Okay, great. Go away. And I've got this workflow dispatch here. This is just an easy way for me to be able to hit the manual button go, so I can invoke it manually, the GitHub action itself, so I don't have to actually do any pushing or anything like that. There is a button in GitHub Actions that I can invoke. But if I work my way down, I define jobs, and I only have one job. Its name is main, and it runs on the latest version of Windows, which I think this unravels to be a container for Windows Server 2019. I'm honestly not too sure. I'm pretty sure it is. But within your job, you have steps, and you can see that I have just 3 steps. Let's disregard the content of these steps right now and just focus on the names. I check out the repository, so that's just a process of cloning my repository onto disk within my GitHub Action workflow runner, so it's available to me. Go away. And then I've got, can I disable this extension? Yeah, go away. I'm just going to spend a minute disabling that. Installed, because that is absolutely infuriating. Disable, go away. And I have another 2 tests. I think I have to reload it after doing that, right? Yeah, I have to reload. I have another 2 steps, sorry, not tests. One of them is Pester, and I'm using the invoke-pester commandlet from the module to invoke a Pester test. And the other one is that I'm going to use a GitHub action with a nice report, which will produce a nice markdown file at the end of the report, which is an action within GitHub Actions, is like a pre-made, ready-to-go cooked function, if you like, where you don't need to kind of necessarily go and write a lot of code yourself. You can just depend on an action which provides various parameters. So for instance, this action Pester test report takes a parameter include pass, where I just tell it, okay, use this script file which contains tests. And I can just give it the report a title and order for it to create the markdown file on the action logs. You have to give it a token. But if we look at the definition of the first one, it's pretty much what I just did with you guys a minute ago within VS Code on the other script, on the other tab. Created the configuration file, set all the same things, and then we called invoke-pester and passed the config object. Now, example.tests.ps1 might actually fail because, like I said, that workflow is going to run on the latest version of Windows, which I think this label translates to Windows Server 2019. So then I'm not going to expect the build to be 10.22.000. And in fact, no, this test might fail because I have the not operator there. So this test might succeed. So I'm just going to kick this off. So I can just go straight to GitHub. I forgot I left that not operator there. I don't know if that changes actually right now in GitHub, though. I might have to push that up real quick. Let me just double check. No. You guys still hear me?
Yep, coming through loud and clear.
Really? Oh, okay. Yeah, I've lost all pinging. How strange is that? Nothing's pinging. That's crazy. Am I going to be at the mercy of the internet here? Is GitHub not loading? It's weird that Teams is working, but this isn't working. Do I have internet connectivity within this? No, I don't have internet connectivity in that. I'm just going to boot it. Let me just reboot it real quick. DNS? Yeah, probably. No, I'm pinging 8.8.8 on my host, and it's not responding, but yeah, I'm still in the Teams meeting. What? That's weird. Let's see if the VM's back up. Yeah, cool. Let me just jump there real quick. Hopefully rebooting it helps. If it does, I'll turn it off and on again. Sorry about this, guys. Just give me a minute. So what I wanted to do was kick off the GitHub action so that I can see the two examples. One way, which is by calling the invoke-pester commandlet, which is like the normal air quotes traditional way on how to invoke a test, or you can use the workflow, the action workflow, which is, or the action. I don't think it's an action workflow, or just the action. Let me ping from here again real quick. No, that's a bummer. I wonder if I can reach out on my desktop, but that would be weird if I can, right? No, why is that? That's strange. That's a real bummer. That really is. I'm not going to be able to show that. Okay, alrighty. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. For just that bit, I'll put together a little GIF and I'll tweet it out just to show that with a link to the GitHub Action YAML files and then the report that the action produces. I guess me still being able to share my screen on the presentation still, and somehow weirdly still being able to be connected to Teams allows me to at least wrap up here. That's super annoying. Okay, no worries. I won't lose sleep over that. So one last thing, I guess, before, what have we got after this? This one and real world examples, this slide and real world examples. So for me, when I first started learning about kind of the whole idea of testing code a couple of months ago, so I didn't understand what these phrases meant, acceptance tests and unit tests. So acceptance tests is easier to understand, at least I found. The idea of acceptance tests is that they are written in a way where your users might also use the code too. So a really nice example is a module. If you write modules and you have functions within your module, you would write your tests and you would call those functions just like your users would, with no understanding of how the code works. You have no understanding or assumption, or the assumption of no understanding of how the inner workings of the code itself works. So then you would just call the functions how your users would, and then you would just ensure that it produces an expected result. So yeah, unit tests, on the other hand, is the inverse. The understanding is that you do have a very clear and detailed understanding of the internal structures of the code, and you would test for specific circumstances where the intent would be that you're aiming for within a very specific few lines within your function, for example, you're aiming for execution to hit those lines so that you can then test the output in that scenario. And generally that can be manipulation of the environment that your code is running in or the parameters that you pass it. But the intent is that you have a solid understanding of the internals of the code and you're trying to desperately hit that complicated part within the code where it has weird if logic or looping structures. You want to hit that section within your code and you want to specifically test that routine within the code. So that's often referred to as clear box testing, whereas acceptance testing is referred to as kind of functional testing. But real world examples. So if you want to go further with this, and you really need to, I've shown you the bare minimum today in order for you to just kind of right away, just write a simple test for something you have right now. But definitely check this out. Rob Sewell, SQL DBA with a beard, really nice guy. He just wrote an easy to read blog, a couple of minutes read, and his scenario of his Pester test there is that he's a DBA, right? He wants to make sure that the SA account is disabled on his SQL servers. So he wrote a test that queries his SQL servers to make sure that none of them have the SA account enabled. So that's a nice infrastructure test, not necessarily a test focused on your code, using it as an infrastructure test. So check that one out. I thought that was it's a very easy and light read, and it's a really nice sort of eye opener that you don't just have to use Pester for code testing. And then here is like a module that I wrote and I maintain, and it's, if you wanted to see working examples of how I use Pester, and here is where the point I would stop sharing and share my screen to this module and talk about some of the tests I have, but my internet's being weird, so I'll just leave the link there. If you want to see a working example of tests, I've written a bunch of acceptance tests for my module, and again, I'm not an expert. I've just learned Pester and I'm just getting to grips with the idea of kind of testing code in general. But if you just wanted to see a working example of using Pester with a module and even using it in a pipeline, definitely check that repo out. I have that set to run every day. I have it set to run tests every day. It tests my code against Schlink. Schlink is a self-hosted application for a URL sort of redirection service, and the benefit of running it every day is that because Schlink might change at any given point, and a part of that reasoning of making sure that my code survives, I want to make sure that it works for my users all the time. So as well as me being like an avid subscriber to the release notes for Schlink, making sure that my code is autonomously running every day, testing every day against a working Schlink instance is key. It's part of the survival reasons for making sure that my code's still relevant. And then final comments, right? So wrapping up, nearly at the hour, so that's pretty lucky, right? Docs, the docs for Pester, Jakob, and everybody else who has contributed has done a solid job on writing excellent docs. It's tons of examples, great explanations. I started there and I felt like I had everything I needed straight away. Highly recommend their docs. This sort of short link here, Pester playlist, is to a YouTube playlist that Jakob maintains, to all recordings over the years where people have talked about, just like I have, introing you to Pester. So if you wanted like multi-channel learning, if you didn't want to just depend on me teaching you this, you wanted to hear it from someone else with a different sort of use case and different way of explaining things, check that out. There's varying degrees of kind of complexity, right? I've kind of started dipping toes in the water. Other people show you more, and there's definitely value in that. And then lastly, Chris Dent's book. So Chris Dent is very helpful in the community, and this book in particular covers a wide range of things. But there is a chapter specifically in Chris's book that describes things differently for Pester. That's not in Pester docs. Not to suggest that the docs of Pester are shortcoming in any way, but he just has different scenarios. And for me, there's mocking is a feature within Pester that I did not talk about, but for me, mocking, that feature took a minute for me to really appreciate its value. And Chris's book, his chapter on Pester, is super helpful. It clicked for me there. And that book is just like a solid reference anyway. So, it's not the sort of book that you would read end to end every day for, I don't know, a month. It's the sort of book you would have as a reference, if things like wanting to learn more about .NET types, classes, true error handling, you want to get really good at error handling, or even Pester itself. If you just know those are things you want to get good at with Pester, just have it there as a reference. There's specific chapters on specialist things, and that I can't push that book enough. It's and it's not even anything Chris asked to do. It's a fantastic resource. It's not anything Chris asked me to do. It's just a fantastic resource. And that's it. I'm really sorry about the internet. That's a real bummer. I'm still not able to ping out. But it's super weird that I'm still in the meeting and that's working. I thought I was okay with networking, but I guess I'm not. It's the idea that you write your code, you write your test, verify your test. Then as you update your code, you run the tests. And if they fail, you either need to fix your code or update your tests. Yeah, great question. Yes, that's a thought-provoking question, because there is an idea that you should write your tests first before you write code. That's called test-driven development. The idea that you think of what you want to write, you think about it deeply, and then you write a test, and then you go ahead, write your code, and your code is only complete when your test succeeds in a perfect world. But I guess what you're getting at is that that you write your code, you write your test, verify your test, and as you update your code, you run your test. Yeah, exactly that. You're right. And if they fail, you either need to fix your code or update your test. Yeah, absolutely. And it depends. You're right, and it depends on what your code runs against, as to which dictates, do you need to fix your test or do you need to fix your code? If your code depends on something like Active Directory, which is a relatively stale technology now that doesn't kind of change too much, if ever, or if it's against something like something quite volatile that changes frequently, then you see where I'm going with that. You either need to change your code. There's a problem with your code. There's a recent change in your code that's caused your test to fail. But if your tests don't accommodate for this change, then you might need to tweak your change. Might need to tweak your test instead. But yeah, that's a solid question. Did I miss any other questions, Chris? Or was that?
No, I think you get them all. The conversation about Pester testing in Azure kind of went on, but I think it might be out of the scope of Pester itself. Maybe if there's some folks more in tune with how Azure automation works, they might be able to respond there.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think you got it.
Cool. Yeah, Tyler, I've just scrolled up, saw your message again. I'll tweet out what I have in my VS Code stuff, all the extensions and the theme and stuff. I can share that. I'll tweet it. There's my handle there. And yeah, for the GitHub Actions bit, I'll also tweet out the link to the YAML files and then to the example report, maybe a GIF or something. I'm super annoyed that internet didn't play ball with me today. I'm sorry about that, but what can you do?
You'd think with 45 IT people, on a call, we could figure it out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's super weird. I'm not pinging. I can't ping out, but yeah, whatever. I'm on this call. Yeah.
This call may be the last time you're on the internet. Maybe after you drop, this is it for you.
Don't say that. If you can please tweet out the links you had in your presentation. Yeah, for sure. That's fair. Yeah. Oh, thank you. That's kind. Cool. If anybody got any questions, I guess now's the time. But Chris, I really appreciate you pushing me to do this. I enjoy doing it, but I don't enjoy the thought of doing it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. I think a lot of us feel that way, right? We'd love to, get up in front and be like, "Here's what I'm going to do," but it's terrifying to actually think. Yeah, that call's about to start. I think it's the fear of something failing for me, right? It's being on the call and then nothing works.
I relate to that. Yeah, it was
That's-
heartbreaking that Pester died for me and my internet too. But yeah, what can you do?
You did, better than our first one where an entire lab failed, I think 2 hours before a presentation.
But it still delivered fine, right? He did a good job.
He did deliver
right?
fine. Yeah, Adam
Yeah.
Gross was an amazing presenter.
How does he do it? That guy's a whiz kid.
It's the energy.
I've been meaning to dip my toes into Pester for a really long time. I think it'd be the kiss. Do you know what, Tim? That's exactly what I wanted to do. For me, I was in the exact same boat for years. I was telling myself, "Hey, I should look at Pester. Everyone talks about it," but I never did it, and I don't know what sparked me to do it. I think it was. I'm so glad Chris pushed me to do this. I'm so glad that you found it useful. That's awesome. Appreciate the nice comments. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Yeah, and a final thanks from me as well, Adam. And I'm sure I speak on behalf of everybody. Awesome job, and look forward to whatever you're going to do for us third.
Yeah.
Come up with something exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you, Chris. No, I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Of course. Awesome. I think it's going to wrap it up. I think we'll kill the recording. For anybody who didn't screen cap all of Adam's info, we'll also have it up on the WinAdmin site under events. You can find our hopefully April event up there soon, and you can connect with Adam and you can see the presentation and everything you talked about today. So cool. Thanks again, Adam, and thanks everyone.
Thank you. Cheers. Enjoy the rest of your day.